But one thing I think all of us can agree is if the Rockets lose tonight, Mike D'Antoni, like, we don't even need the pleasantries of the, well, we're going to review. Everybody's under review. We'll figure it out. Like, D'Antoni will be fired if they lose. There's a chance that Daryl Morey's fired if they lose. Even if they win, there's a very strong likelihood they lose to the Lakers. And when you factor in what Tillman Fertitta said last year when they lost to the Warriors, remember, he wasn't just mad that they lost to the Warriors. He was mad that they lost to the Warriors at home. The Rockets have this curious kind of run of losing their last playoff game at home. Additionally, in these last playoff games, James Harden kind of no-shows at the end of series. And when they lost to the Warriors last year, if you remember, the Warriors weren't at full strength. Kevin Durant didn't play. So it's one thing to lose to the Warriors. You're like, well, they got Kevin Durant, and they got Steph Curry, and they got Klay Thompson, and they got Draymond Green, and we had come so close before. But they commissioned a study on why they lost Game 7 the year before and blamed the refs, not the 27 missed three-pointers in a row. Then they get another shot at the Warriors, and though they may not have won the series, to lose at home and the Warriors don't have their best player, I'd be mad too. So Fertitta said, like, I want to win, and I want to win now. They clean house with the coaching staff with the exception of the head coach. Daryl Morey may or may not keep his job, and I don't believe D'Antoni does. Eventually, if they lose. But I feel like the Rockets are in that place that a lot of colleges are in when they want to fire their coach. I'm not saying that Mike D'Antoni is the guy. His teams, and he's coached, I mean, it's kind of an amazing career, right? To coach in 3 of the 4 biggest markets in the NBA. Did you guys realize that? He was head coach of the Lakers, the Knicks, the Rockets, 4th biggest market, and as well as Phoenix, where he had the most success he's ever had. And of course, in Denver, previous to that, like, it's not for lack of opportunity. Where have I seen this before? That his team's lack of ability to close the series, to get big defensive stops, ultimately undoes an amazing regular season team. That's Mike D'Antoni Basketball 101. I'm not saying that you keep him. I'm just saying this. Has anybody asked the question, who's the guy who could fix it? There are calls to bring back Jeff Van Gundy. But Jeff Van Gundy is a Pat Riley disciple. He's a defense guy. How do you think that goes over with James Harden? I love Jeff Van Gundy. There's many teams I'm like, why don't you hire Jeff Van Gundy? Just throw a bunch of money at him. He's a great basketball coach. Great basketball coach. But I don't know how that, when your 2 best players are 2 guys with flaws defense, like Russell Westbrook, I think people think is a really good defensive player because he's so athletic, because he makes mean faces, and occasionally he'll get a steal. But the truth is that he checks out a defense for about half of every season, and he's just okay in the postseason when he is engaged. And then offensively, And what happens is we watch in such limited instances in terms of how hard he plays hard all the time. Like, no, he doesn't. He does not. Ask people in Oklahoma City, they'll nod their head like, no, he takes games off defensively. And now, of course, he's 4 knee surgeries in. He's not the same guy, and he still has some of the same issues in terms of the volume of shots and inability to make shots. Then you got James Harden, who's great when he has the ball. Great. He's not good. He's great. But he requires a very specific style in order to be successful, right? Like, I don't know if there's a lot of coaches that are going to let him go through his legs 15 times before he goes and gets his shot. Maybe. But the bigger question is, okay, not D'Antoni. Who then? And don't give me the anybody. That's not actually the way it works. Because in order to win a championship, so oftentimes in the NBA, you have to have been there before. You have to have won before. Like, that's the catch-22 of coaching in the NBA. To win a championship as a coach, you have to have won a championship as a coach. Or to have the respect of a locker room, you have to have won a championship. To win a championship, you have to have the respect of a locker room. Reminds me of Fat Bastard in Austin Powers 2. I eat because I'm unhappy, and I'm unhappy because I eat. It's a vicious cycle. I agree. I'm not a guy who's sitting here proposing I have all the answers. But I think the lack of an obvious answer is the conundrum that the Houston Rockets are in. Do you keep Daryl Morey? He did build this team into a consistent winner. He did pull off some magnificent moves, but he does have them locked up in a sort of cap hell that they've constantly tried to rework. And if you keep him, do you hire a coach that believes in his analytics first philosophy? Or do you scrap the whole thing and start over? But then you're not going to get rid of James Harden. You can't get rid of Russell Westbrook. What do? I think you might be screwed. Right? Warriors seem to have a plan, took a year off. Lakers are still going to roll with LeBron. Clippers are loaded. They're not going anywhere for a while. Then there's you, which was the Boston Celtics against the defending champion Toronto Raptors. Now, I pointed this out before, but I'll point it out again. Has any team received less credit, respect, adulation, anything as a defending champion than the Toronto Raptors? Now, look, I'm very well aware that Kawhi Leonard no longer plays for the Raptors, and that's a big portion of why people don't, there's no sort of fandom or respect given to the Toronto Raptors. But the regular season record was pretty stellar, right? They finished as the number 2 seed, 53-19. Like, that is not chopped liver. But no one I know thinks of the Raptors as the defending champs, where you have to take down the defending champs. If you're like, no, nobody considers them even, they don't win it last year if Golden State's healthy. And they don't have Kawhi Leonard, so you don't feel like they're a threat to win it this year, although they surprised everybody throughout the regular season, even the bubble season. But that's not really what I want to get into. What I'm more interested in is the Boston Celtics. You know, much like the Lakers won when the Thunder won 2 nights ago because they got extra time off, and which either team that they play, they have a good matchup against, but will be just exhausted. The opposite is true for Kyrie Irving. Now, I think it's utterly and completely ridiculous. No, not the flat earth thing. Not the, what I thought was obvious, but some have thought otherwise, which is the entire idea that going into the bubble would somehow take away from the movement towards social change in our country. Whether or not less people are watching, which less people are watching in the bubble than traditionally watch the playoffs, that's regardless of that. Whatever number of people are watching in the playoffs is exponentially higher than how many people would be paying attention if there were no playoffs. Somehow Kyrie Irving, and to a lesser extent Kevin Durant, nobody's mentioned DeAndre Jordan. Like, DeAndre Jordan had COVID, but like that was when they were first start to be in the bubble. The Brooklyn Nets, I thought, would have had a great opportunity to still be playing had they decided to play, but they didn't. And much like any job, if you don't show up to your job, somebody will, and that's an opportunity that is kicked away, given away. And what has happened in his stead? The Boston Celtics are up 2-0 on the defending champion Toronto Raptors. And though Kemba Walker did not play, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he played great basketball last night. Not. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that Kemba Walker is better than Kyrie Irving. He's not. But that was a loss last night. That was an absolute L for Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving's hitting the game-winning shot, essentially the game-winning shot in Game 7 of the NBA Finals. He should be synonymous with winning as a champion, as a guy who you could have faith in down the stretch, and he may still be synonymous with it. But it's really hard to watch the Celtics, who went to the Eastern Conference Finals when he was hurt, right? Who had a playoff run the year before he got there, and are now up 2-0 on the Toronto Raptors. when he's not there, and then look at their failures last year in the playoffs and not, what is the difference here? No one's ever said Al Horford's a bad teammate or hard to coach. And Al Horford was part of that team the year they won when he was hurt. And the year Isaiah Thomas led them after the death of his sister. And he was hurt, playing injured. Meanwhile, Kyrie Irving, the year he plays in the playoffs of the Celtics, they're a disaster. So I ask you again, what is the correlation? Kyrie Irving lost last night, and he didn't play a game. This is one of the things that happens when you don't play is other people take those opportunities. And it's one of the key points that should be made for why Kyrie Irving, while super, super talented and individually might be a better player, but not a better teammate and not a guy you necessarily want running your club if you want to win a championship. They go to the conference finals 2 consecutive years without him. They lose in the semis last year. And, look, he actually led them in win shares. But they lost to the Milwaukee Bucks in 5 games. And oh yeah, by the way, Kyrie Irving continued to try and guard Giannis. In their scouting report, I was told that under no uncertain circumstances did they want him guarding Giannis. And then he would get switched onto Giannis and try and guard him, and he couldn't guard him. And instead of trying to play by the game plan and do what they asked to hide him so that his offensive talents could come out and they could hide his defense against a guy who he had no shot at guarding, Kyrie would do the opposite. Kemba Walker is not the finisher in terms of finishing shots of Kyrie. I don't think he's the passer of Kyrie. I know that Kyrie has a reputation, some earned, of being a little selfish, but he's a great passer. I don't think he's a ball handler. Kemba's a little bit older. Kemba's up and down as a shooter. He's fine defensively. It's not like he's Michael Cooper shutting dudes down. He's not Marcus Smart. But you know what he is? He knows how to win. Hits essentially the game-sealing shot last night, but the team is just better, feels better, seems better, emotionally more in line with each other. It doesn't mean that Kyrie's a loser. I'm not saying that. I'm in awe of his jaw-dropping talent, but there's something, whether it's the lack of regard or respect for coaching, or it's the lack of ability to communicate appropriately with teammates in terms of how you want to play and how they should play and how they can all get plenty of their own shots. Some of it, without any question, is the growth and maturity of Jason Tatum, who's becoming a star. No question. Jason Tatum's better this year than he was last year. And the year before, when they went to the Eastern Conference Finals, some of it was they had a fairly easy trip of it, and the East was down, and some of it was those guys played a little bit above their level. But a lot of it was they just seemed to be free of the Kyrie thing, which is what it felt like last night.